have local historian Robert Sheehan with us today. Robert, welcome and thanks for coming in such
thank you,
short
Michael.
notice.
Thank you.
Frank wasn't available, as you know.
That's right.
So, where would describe the setting that we're in?
Well, Oliver Plunkett Street, which is what we're going to talk about today, is the only planned street in Cork. It's, I suppose it's actually a mile long, stretching from Grand Parade down to Parnell Place. Yes, it's a mile long. It's actually an old mile. It's not a mile by today's standards.
A country mile?
A country mile, which would be less than a kilometre. And what you're talking about here is the longest street in Europe. They think it's Blarney Street. It's actually Oliver Plunkett Street, if measured from the right angle. If you know what I mean.
Oh, I do. And why is it called the street that the ladies love?
Street that the ladies love. Well, it goes back to the I suppose it was proximate to the docks, and you had your ladies of the night patrolling at a certain hour of the night, and when the labourers would get off and the sailors coming up towards Grand Parade, I suppose they'd be propositioned on the way, and they'd be heading that way anyway with their money. And
there was always a kind of a supposition that I suppose prostitutes in Cork were particularly expensive compared to other parts of the country. Why was that?
Well, the idea was that they were seen as more upmarket because of the clothes they wore, and it just simply came down to that. They had more expensive corsets because the corsets were made, of course, in Collinson's barracks, and Collinson's barracks had the material brought in from the butter bags. The butter bags were used to make the corsets, and of course Cork had the best reputation in the world for butter.
And from the research you've done, would you think that they were worth the extra few pound?
Well, I don't know. Apparently from the noises you'd hear from outside the brothels, it was worth every penny. And they used to call it the sailor's gasp. There was a particular sound the sailor would make I suppose he was pleased.
Oh, yes.
That was supposed to be worth the money then.
And Oliver Plunkett Street, a great street for bakeries. How did people get interested in making bread on that street?
Well, look, what they say is with a lot of sex, there's a lot of bread. And the reason being, I suppose, is obvious. You need the energy, and that's how the bakeries sprung up along that way. There was 48 bakeries at one stage in the same street. 18 were all owned by Donnelly's, which became Donnelly's Bread later.
Oh,
then
yes.
there was Brennan's, owned I think 20 of them, and then Independence after that. So each of them would be making all sorts of pies and apple tarts, and the original French eclair came from that area as well.
Is that right?
That's right.
And you'd think that there'd be a great rivalry between the bakeries, but apparently there was no rivalry.
There was no rivalry because there was no time for rivalry. Each and every one of them was extremely busy. With the booming sex trade, you had the booming bread trade, and demand was there, so there was no rivalry.
And tell me about the story that no one ever stepped on Oliver Plunkett Street. There was people to carry the citizens around.
That's right.
Why was that?
Well, I'm laughing now because Tim Shea, who's another researcher, told me a story. He said he was once carried from Grand Parade to Parnell Place and back by a lady he didn't know, and the reason being because she thought he was inebriated, and that was the service. You'd be carried around from pub to pub in order to facilitate your drinking.
And it was only women that were allowed to carry the people around, is that right?
That's right. Women were considered stronger, and they were considered to know the way better because they didn't drink as much. You see, the men would come off the ships, get I suppose the word is langers. They get langers drunk, and they'd be carried around by the women then. You know what I mean? And I suppose most of them would laugh because they'd say, "I'm looking for a woman in my arms tonight," but of course they'd end up in the woman's arms. But either way, they seem to find a mate,
And it was only women of a certain age and background that would be able to do the service.
Well, you'd need a brawny woman. You'd need they call it a houseworn woman who had raised kids and had to wash a woman's hands, and they'd be of a certain weight. Of course, you couldn't have a young woman carrying an older brawny man. So yeah, I mean, like they were certainly of a certain disposition,
I see. And so tell me then, where did the darts come into this?
Darts. The history of darts can be traced to a particular shop on Oliver Plunkett Street. It's now known as the High B. but it was originally an arrow maker, and they became a dart maker then when the arrows had to be shortened, because when war stopped, they decided, well, look, there's no need for the longbow anymore. We're going to make tiny versions of the same thing and just kind of use them for sport. That's how the dart started. And some of the greatest darts players were trained in that particular house in Cork.
And that was the same house that the Disprin was invented by your own grandfather.
My own grandfather had the first recorded headache in Cork. And it came about because, I suppose, the darts really, a dart flew into his head. And he came down one morning rubbing his forehead. His wife said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I have a pain in my head." She said, "Have you anything for it?" "I don't, but I'll make something." So he did up his own concoction there.
Yeah, he had a plant on the window. And he
had a plant on the window. It turned out to be the right chemical compound. And it went from there. He started selling those tablets it was one of the first pharmacies as well in Cork. He started selling that, and his son then he called Pfizer, and that's where you get Pfizer today. Yeah.
And that wasn't the only achievement by your grandfather. He was also responsible for a fairly nifty device for getting mice to the right side of the room.
That's right. Well, my grandfather, just to tell you a small bit about him as well, he was a southpaw boxer.
Oh, yes.
He fought with O'Brien's boxing club, which was the original in Cork as well.
That originally Kavanagh's and O'Brien's boxing.
Kavanagh's and O'Brien's, but O'Brien's bought them out in the end.
Oh, yes.
Because they had the surplus of gloves, because they used to get the gloves made out of the butter bags, which came from the butter market.
I see.
But also he became interested in pets, and any animal he was fascinated by.
Yeah.
And he adopted a lot of mice that came into our house, or my dad's house. He invented this system that would catch a mouse and have him thrown through the air and land in an egg cup at the other side of the room. Now, however he managed it, nobody was ever able to tell, because each mouse has his own weight. So the machine, the actual contraption, had to measure the mouse's weight and throw him at the right speed and right angle to land in an egg cup at the other side of the room. Not only that, but nobody ever knew what the purpose of it was, because invariably the poor mouse would end up injured in some way.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's why he ended up with so many mice, because he had to take care of them then afterwards.
I see. Seamus Deegan, thank you very much for that excellent roundup. And will you be able to make it next week?
Next week we are doing Friar's Walk, which is even more interesting. So we'll see you then, Michael.
We'll see you then.